Welcome to Elected, a podcast for women in and around politics. I'm your host, Sarah Elder-Chamanara, and this week my guest is Jasmine Mian. Jasmine is currently running for City Council in Ward 3 in Calgary, but Jasmine also has a much bigger and broader bio. So you've worked in both the public and private sectors. You've represented Canada at the Olympics. You have 2 graduate degrees, a Master's of Science in Psychology, and Jasmine also has a Master's in Public Policy with a focus on municipal policy. You're a passionate volunteer with organizations including Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Calgary, Ask Her YYC. You're a vocal champion for safety, and you represent Canada on international and national commissions, including the Canadian Olympic Committee's Athlete Commission. In terms of being an Olympian, you competed in wrestling in the 2016 Games in Rio de Janeiro, as well as you are also a University World Champion and Commonwealth Games medalist. So politics and sports, it's just the best and most interesting combination. So Jasmine, welcome to Elected. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Sarah. I'm so happy to be here and chatting with you today.
Yes, I'm so excited to have this conversation, and also maybe to give you a break from the campaign trail.
Yeah, it's always nice to. Right now, it's very busy. We're a few months out from the election, so full time focused on the campaign. So it is nice to have a chat about something related to the campaign, but not necessarily full on campaigning.
Right, and so obviously, I mean, you have a Master's in Public Policy with a focus on municipal policy. I mean, if only every politician went into was applying to be in politics, they would have that qualifications, because, a lot of people have an idea of what politics is, but then don't actually understand the mechanics of it. Whereas you obviously do. But I really wanted to talk to you today specifically around, the idea of running and then the realities of running, and what you thought it would be like versus what you have experienced so far. So how has that been, and what has that looked like for you?
Yeah, great question. As you mentioned in my bio, I had been very involved with Ask Her YYC, which, for those who don't know, is a Calgary-based organization that encourages women to run for local government. And I was a volunteer with them for the year prior to 2021, which is when our municipal election is. And I was encouraging so many different women to run. We need more women to be in the race. There's not enough women who, put their name on the ballot to even begin with. And after being so involved and I've always wanted to run for politics, but I just wasn't sure when I would do it. And I also knew that I probably wouldn't run in a partisan capacity because of just my background and training and really wanting to make a difference at the city level. I think cities are often overlooked in terms of the huge impact that they have for everyone in the community. And in some ways, I think we are told that municipal politics is more accessible for women. Start local is sort of the advice you're given. Whether or not that's true, is it really more accessible, remains to be seen. So now that I'm in the race, you come front and center with what some of the challenges and invisible barriers are for anyone who's running, but particularly those with intersectional identities, and what that has been like for me. So I'm running for Ward 3 City Council, and, I was struck by the fact that I'm actually the only woman that is running. And in an open seat, there's generally a lot of competitors. So we're up to 8 right now. And I was, I'm still surprised that no other women have put their name in, but I kind of understand why, because politics is just such a difficult space to be in. And I was really struck by the fact that, what we look for in good governance professionals is often, not the types of characteristics that the campaign selects for. Mm-hmm. So getting into a campaign, you realize that, I thought my background in public policy and municipal policy would be helpful. It's really not. I think it would be helpful for the job. But in the campaign, like, my background in sport and psychology is actually just so much more useful, because you realize that so much of a campaign is selling. So it's about the human psychology and what people think and the story that they tell themselves about you. And also it's, a kind of a sport. And, there's a day that you need to be the winner on. And so in that sense, my sport background is actually very similar to politics, because you need to be the winner on this day, and you work backwards and think about all the things that you need to be accomplishing in order to make that a reality. So that's some of the things that I have learned so far about like the differences between what I maybe thought it was and then what it actually is. And there's a million other things I can kind of go through, but I'll stop there.
That's really interesting that, it's the sports and thinking about it as the day that you need to win on and then working backwards. And I don't know if that's a lens that many people use actually to apply to their campaigns. They think it's as a day to day to the lead up to that day. Thinking that and that's thinking about how many votes you need to have in order to win. And then every day in the lead up to from when you launch to election day is how do you put those votes in the bag, right? To make sure that you have them so that you do get the result that you want.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that shocked me, or I'm still learning, is just how campaigns do, like I said, self-select for the more aggressive, assertive, salesy types of folks. And that's often not what I think we always need in good governance. And so that's been one of the challenges for me, is how do I talk about myself and what I bring to the table in a way that allows people to know my story, but is also comfortable for me. I'll be honest, I had to be sat down by my campaign team and told, you have to talk about the fact that you're an Olympian. It's part of your story. You have to talk about it. But I just didn't want to talk about it because I was like, maybe it's not relevant, or, maybe people won't like that, or whatever else. And I think women do this all the time, thinking about reasons why you shouldn't talk about this or shouldn't talk about that, or thinking about I look very young, and what are people going to think about that? And I've even had experiences where I've been with my husband or another man volunteer, and we go and talk to someone, and they assume that they're the candidate.
Of course they do.
And I have to say, hey, I'm actually the candidate. And those types of small things happen all the time. And especially I think when you're running against a whole bunch of other people who are very aggressive and bold and that kind of thing, it makes you really reflect on, what can I bring to the table? How can I articulate that I have not just those same aggressive personality types, but I can also collaborate. I'm an active listener. I'm going to bring people together. All the reasons we know that we need more diversity in politics, all those other skill sets, how you articulate that has been a challenge for sure.
And that's a really interesting conversation to have, because men, when they're presenting themselves as candidates, they don't, in my experience, don't often focus on those more soft skills. They focus solely on the I've spent, X number of years in the private sector. I'm married with X number of children to my wife or partner of however many years. I've lived in the community. I'm born in the community. And that's really it. Right? That's the story. Which is in contrast, women as candidates want to talk about all of the other things, right? Do you think female candidates have to present themselves as more than men do you think that voters expect that in some ways, or is it us trying to just present ourselves in a way that is a contrast?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think that I can only speak for myself.
Yeah,
but
of course.
You sometimes come into it with a little bit more doubt, and you feel like an imposter because you are as a woman in politics, or as anyone who's not, the typical politician, you probably feel like an imposter because most people around you don't have those same characteristics. So if you feel different, that's okay, because you are different and you're bringing something else to the table. And that's really important, because you can make space for other people once you go. So when you get elected, you're not just getting elected yourself, you're bringing along a lot of other people with you. And that's really important. So I'd say it's a little bit of that. But I think women do struggle with this likability, competence, tension. So if you're very likable people will question your competence as a woman. Whereas if you're very competent, you're a bit nasty. You're not quite very nice. And I'm not really sure I want to vote for her. And so I feel like as a woman, there's this very difficult struggle with those two things. And, being confident. And I think some of the things that I realized when I first got into the race, I consider myself quite a confident person. I always go for things. I'm a risk taker. I've been like that my whole life. But I think as a young woman, I was also very much socialized to be liked by everyone and to bring people together and be a collaborator. And you quickly learn in politics that, unfortunately, that's not always what other people expect from you and want from you. And so that was a bit of a challenge for me to navigate, like my own personality, and also realizing that, and I tell myself this all the time when I go into different interviews and when I introduce myself to people, is that important people take up time and space. And it's okay to take up space. As a young woman in politics, I think you often feel like you need to rush through your sentences and get your point out because nobody's going to give you enough time to finish. And really, like, telling myself that's not true. Some of those things you have to just command the room yourself. And there are going to be things, when we go into candidate forums, that I think as a woman candidate, you have to ensure that the organizers know what they're doing, that they have a plan for if people just start talking over you, and what they're going to do if someone starts heckling. Like, I think there are certain precautions, I would almost say, that you have to take as a woman in politics to ensure that you're going to have space to be yourself and to get your point across. But it is possible. And I always push myself to do this because I know that I have a ton of different privileges. Like the fact that I'm in this race, the fact that I can, raise the money that you need to be able to do this, that I can tell my story, and that all of that, there's so many folks who that's just not even an option for them. And if you don't take that opportunity to sit at the table and make Calgary a more accessible place for everyone, how can we expect anyone else to do that? So I feel like the campaign is not just about myself, but it is about making sure that we can have a more diverse council that really does represent the people.
I completely agree. It's interesting when you talk about, like, you can either be competent, or this is a thread that just keeps on coming up in so many conversations that I have with women in politics, in whatever capacity it is, around being competent or being liked. And it is hard because I want to be liked. But then you meet people and you realize no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try, no matter, how you come about it, you just won't be liked. And that's hard. It's really hard for me. It's one of the things that I struggle with the most. Do you have, like, how do you walk yourself through those moments? And how do you give yourself a pep talk? Like, what's your strategy to dealing with it?
Good question. And, it's still a journey for me. When I first announced, I didn't even have a platform out yet. And I ran a very generic Facebook ad just to see, we were just testing it out and seeing how that was going to look for the campaign. And I was very much shocked and taken aback by how much negative feedback I got just by my very existence and photo and name being out in the race, and people really pushing and frustrated, I think, thinking that I'm maybe something that was in some way threatening to them. And so I got a lot of really nasty comments right off the hop. And that was really shocking for me because I was just in the race. Like I said, I didn't even have any platform out yet. So there wasn't even anything substantive for people to not like. And I just felt like I was being totally attacked. And that really shook me. And that was one of those days where I was like, what am I doing? And, I talked to my husband and people who were in my circle, and just, I felt unsafe. I was like, wow, I can't believe that these people who don't even know me would say all these things. And I think the biggest thing that you realize is that they don't even know you, right? And what is out there is really a caricature of your true self as well. And if you don't tell your story, and this is one thing I would say that in some ways I learned the hard way, if you don't tell your story, other people will tell it for you. And you really have to own who you are. I've been told by people that I'm both an NDP hack and a UCP plant. like, and I'm neither of those things. And so it's just, you have to be able to tell your story because people will fill in the gaps for you. And I think, write down on a small piece of paper all the people whose opinions really do matter to you. And those people are often the people that are going to love you no matter what, even if you do make a mistake or say something you shouldn't say. And if those people are, still loving you and still encouraging you with what you're doing, that's all you need. And I think it was one thing to say that, like, I've grown up my whole life being like, yeah, it's okay. Like, I don't really care that much what everyone thinks. That's not true. I really do care a lot about what other people think. But you have to, there's a time and a place, I think, to care about everyone's opinions. And you do have to sort of compartmentalize and know that in this game, like, you're absolutely not going to be liked by everyone. And if you are, you're probably not really standing for much. Yes. So that is the other thing that you have to really remind yourself of. But this process will change you. And I think I wasn't ready for the ways that I would need to change and harden in some regards. I liked who I was, and I liked those softer elements of myself. I think I still have them. They're just, a little bit behind a wall because, social media in particular is just a nasty place. But when you get to chatting to people in person, even if they disagree with you, they're far more reasonable. And so I really do understand now why so many politicians have their staff completely running their social media, or they're not really on it, because
it would be too hard to read all of it because it's so disturbing.
It really is, especially in the partisan capacity. Like, I do think at the city level, it is a little bit different because you don't have a built-in opposition. But it's still, I could still see how it would get to you. And so I've had to really set up boundaries for myself of what I look at and what I don't look at. I have my team now. When we advertise something, they read the comments, and if someone's asking a real question about my platform or policies, they send me the question and I send a response. But I've had to do that because you realize that if you don't protect yourself, you just won't be able to do the job that you need to do, and it'll get to you. So I think if you are able to look at all those comments and still do this, then that's great. But I do think that, setting those appropriate boundaries and realizing that, it's okay that not everyone likes you, that those are really important lessons. And
it's hard though, isn't it? Yeah. Like it's still, I mean, I'm like you in some ways. and I'm not even running for anything, but being in the sphere of running Madam Premier, I've gotten my fair share of comments as well. And, and having to deal with like, well, why don't they like me? I just want to be their friend, but also being criticized, for some people, I'm just like you said, I'm either, too left or too right, or actually, I also don't like you because you're a centrist. So it's like, you really can't win. It's really hard for someone to learn that lesson. And I think, do you think that just in the preparation or in the sphere of women who are running or thinking about running, is there enough conversation around this kind of thing, or is it maybe too positive in some ways?
Great question. And that's something I struggled with as soon as I started running was, I've been spending the last year and a half telling women, run, it's great. It's so important for society that you run, which is all that is true. But I'm not sure that we spend enough time really explaining what it's like. But at the same time, I will say that that's the difference between knowledge and wisdom. So I did have women say, like, this is going to be hard. This is going to happen. You have to be prepared for this. And I was like, yeah, I got it. Sort of like in taking the information in a textbook sort of way. But then you live it. And that's when you become very wise to it. And I think that you can kind of only truly understand once you've lived it. And we know that lived experience is so important for a reason. And so I'm not, as much as I think we do have to be very honest, and I did have some great mentors in the political space who were quite frank with me about it, but I still think I didn't really understand. It didn't truly sink in for me until I started living it. And now I think I'm still like, I still want to see more women run. I'm still so happy that I'm running, but I think the truth is we'll never change politics unless we get more women elected. So, these early pioneers who have gotten into politics many, decades ago and done so much of this work, we stand on their shoulders. Right. And this is something that I learned in sport as well, because I come from wrestling, which was a very male dominated sport. 35, 40 years ago, women didn't even do wrestling. It was only a men's sport. And women started to kind of show up at the training room and said like, hey, can I wrestle? And this sort of happened in the 90s. And there were at first, not very welcome there. And slowly over time, they were allowed to go, but they had to go to the men's practices and had to hang. And slowly but surely, women started to compete in wrestling. And the first Olympics for women's wrestling was in 2004.
Really?
And, yeah, exactly. Not that long ago.
No.
And so women went from like not even wrestling to in the Olympics. And since then, Canadian women have had an Olympic medalist in every Olympic since it started. And we're one of the best in the world. And I think for me, what that experience showed was that you can go from, complete inequity to excellence within a generation. It is possible. It's not easy. And I think a lot of people had to struggle through that so that it was a lot easier for me when I was growing up. I didn't have to do a lot of those same things. But I try and remember that when you're getting into difficult things like running for politics and feeling like this is not necessarily the most accessible space, is I'm not just making it more accessible for myself. I'm making it more accessible for the person that's like me, that's going to try and do this in 20 years from now. Yeah,
I totally agree. I'm not sure if you've been following what's been happening with Annamie Paul, the federal Green leader. But there's so many aspects of the story that are seemingly ever changing, but fundamentally for me is the belief that she should have a space in politics. And if she, for some reason, ends up leaving or being forced to leave, then that's a step back for us in terms of equity on the Canadian political stage. And to me, that's not acceptable. So, but bringing it back to Calgary, hopefully there are women running for mayor this year. And one of whom we both know, Jyoti Gondek. And I know that she's done something that I don't know if anyone's ever done before, but she's given like any female candidate the space to go door knocking with her, I believe. So, even just that, it kind of a strength in numbers kind of, right? And she as a current city councilor, but she's making way for other women. And so are you already thinking about ways that you could potentially make space for other women if you are elected as well?
Absolutely. I think that, it's not just bringing the lens that you will bring to policy, but it is also about thinking about how can we get more women involved in politics, and just women with and folks with different identities, because you realize that all of our experiences of the city are so shaped by who we are and where we live and what we do. So that's definitely something I'm thinking of. And, in regards to Jyoti and campaigns, because as much as you want to make space when you are elected, the pathway to getting elected is often the biggest barrier, right? So how is it that you can help women actually run successful campaigns is I think where we have to start. And so that's, can we come together to hand out literature together so that we can, look at school board trustees, especially, they have to cover 2 wards. And that's really, really difficult. And, how do we help women fundraise? That's another big thing. So I think the biggest thing for women who make it, so to speak, is what do you do with that power that you end up having? Do you share that? Do you introduce, your network to these next women? And that's something that I have really experienced from so many women who have ran before. And it's something that in Alberta, I think across partisan lines, you can see agreement around this specific issue. It doesn't matter if you're a conservative or NDP. The experience of being a woman politician is something that everyone kind of can coalesce around and be like, yeah, we need to do more in this regard. And I've been to many different events where you see politicians of all stripes kind of coming together to say, let's do more. So I think it's a really important topic, and how to do it is always constantly evolving, but I think it is really just about sharing and collaborating, which is kind of the exact opposite of what typically happens in politics, unfortunately.
Yeah. Have you, so you're running against 7 men, and we're in June. So we still, the election is in October. So we're July, August, September. I mean, obviously no one's going to run probably in September, but I mean, it is where the clock is ticking down on that window, and the summer is the prime time to campaign, but also in a COVID context. So have you had to, if you had thought about running before COVID and now actually running during COVID, what are some of the things that you've had to change or adapt? And are you door knocking? Are you not door knocking? And how did you make those decisions?
Yeah, it's been very tough to figure out how to do a campaign in COVID. And no matter who you talk to, who has so much campaign experience, they say, well, I have decades of campaign experience, but I've never done it in a global pandemic. So I'm not entirely sure what to tell you to do. But I think the good thing is everyone's in the same boat. It is a level playing field in that regard, that we don't really know what to do or how to win in a COVID situation. So having an online presence obviously is very important, but I can tell you that almost anyone on my street does not follow politicians on Twitter. And I think one of the biggest learnings I've had is, as a very political person and someone who follows City Hall very closely, is you do quickly learn that not everyone is like you, right? And one of the biggest cognitive biases that I think we all have is that we assume that the things that matter to us matter to other people, and that they're watching closely. And after we went into phase 2 in June, and then I did start door knocking. So I have been door knocking recently, and you go to the doors and hear what the concerns are of other people. And a lot of folks don't follow municipal politics as closely. And so it is a great opportunity to just have conversations, write about their neighborhood, write about what they want to see. And that is some of the beauty that I think exists in municipal politics, is it doesn't necessarily get so partisan as it certainly does on Twitter. So the conversations that I've been able to have been really great. So yes, I know that voter contact is still going to be the most important thing, and finding unique ways to do that beforehand, whether you're at the dog park or just in public spaces, those kinds of things are going to be very important. And I do suspect that this summer people will be out of the house even more than typical summers, because we can finally, hopefully, get out and about. Because Alberta at least is opening up. So I hope that there's more opportunity to connect with people as we go. And it'll be, I think, more typical status quo campaigning in the summer and in the fall. But up to this point, unfortunately, door knocking became a kind of a partisan thing, at least on Twitter. So you would see some of the more right-leaning candidates, they were door knocking, more left-leaning candidates were not. And I mean, it's unfortunate that these things tend to break this way, but that is certainly what happened. And I think there were people door knocking in my particular ward the entire time. So it is a game of catch up, I think, for some of us who weren't door knocking the whole time. And also, I guess the time will tell whether that was the right choice on those candidates' part to show up to people's door in the middle of a pandemic. But, we did see BC and Saskatchewan go through provincial elections where we did door knock during COVID. And I think it can be done respectfully as long as you're, far enough away. And with the vaccination rates where they are and kind of going in the right direction, I think we'll start to see more of it.
Yeah. So if you were to go back and talk to yourself, the pre-campaign launch, having looked at that first social media post, Jasmine, what would you tell yourself that you didn't know to tell yourself?
That's a good question, because I think I should say, don't look at it, that kind of thing. Yeah. But I think you have to learn things a little bit the hard way. In looking at it, you realize the true value, because other people had given me that advice, that they have their team manage that, and I just didn't listen. And so maybe that's my own stubbornness of having to see it myself to understand. Yeah. But I think, just being yourself is also really important. And I think the thing we forget sometimes is that on the internet, you tend to hear from the most vocal minority. And so it can actually warp your perspective of what is real. And so here, I'll give you an example. Somebody in that, on that post was basically mentioned how I had been doing lit drops and that I had just come to their house to drop off literature. And they were being quite aggressive and like clearly were not a fan of mine. And when I read that, it just made me feel really unsafe, because here was this person online, like totally, really aggressively hating me. And I had just been at their house delivering literature. And so it made me scared to go back out into my own community, that I might interact with somebody like that, who was just so aggressive to me online. Mm-hmm. But what I quickly realized was, like, you know, now that I have been out in the community, 99% of people are going to be nice and polite to you. And it's very rare that you do get those experiences in person. And that almost, if you spend too much time online or thinking about the way people behave online, it can actually hurt your ability to, you know, go out into your own community and connect with people. And so I always remind myself that, like, the online world is not the real world. And when you're starting to feel overwhelmed that, you know, it's too much, I don't know if I can do this, or whatever else you feel, you've probably just spent too much time in that space, and you need to get back in the real world. So that's something I do take some really strategic time to do now, is just get away from the online world.
But it's so frustrating, because I think this is a very common experience as well, is that one negative person, that one negative voice, their voice, it's like the loudest voice. Right. And no matter how many other positive voices in your head, it can seem like, you know, it's one out of, 100, but it seems like the loudest one. That's hard.
Yeah, it is hard for sure. But I think realizing that, and I mean, I've had this experience so many times where I see somebody getting attacked on the internet, and you scroll by and you think that the person who's doing the attacking is out of line. And you might not choose to interject yourself into that, because it might not be the right time or place for you to go necessarily defending somebody. But a lot of times, as a passive observer on the internet, you're not always rolling your eyes, at the person who's being attacked. And you're often rolling your eyes at the person who's doing the attacking. And so just remembering, like, the way that you often would perceive something like that is the way that a lot of people perceive it. They just choose not to get involved. I think it does take a very specific personality to stop and unload on you on the internet. And so you're selecting for a very specific type of person, and that person's often not usually willing to change their mind anyway. So, responding to them once, that's kind of what I always say is important for me to do. But if they're not really wanting to have a conversation, they're just wanting to tell me what they think, then by all means, you can finish typing that. But I don't have to respond. So that is something I would say. And it's something I've had to learn.
Yeah. It's interesting, having that thinking, like, yes, you can say whatever it is you like, but I don't have to respond to you. And a lot of people, especially those who are angry on the internet, I would say, expect, right? They want to get into it with you because that's what they want. They're saying those things to incite that kind of response. And sometimes by not responding, you're putting out a fire by not giving it oxygen.
For sure. And I think the other thing you really have to be mindful of, and I've noticed this a few times, is that, like, the faceless, nameless accounts,
yes,
members and stuff, a lot of times I'm not even sure those are real people. They're bots, or, they're just spam accounts that are trying to make your life miserable. And so, like, I sort of say, like, if you have no name, no face, I don't think I necessarily owe you a response. And so that's helped as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. So, I mean, it's so interesting to see, like, to hear you talk about it and know that post October 20th, or sorry, October 16th. It is October 16th, isn't it?
18th.
Oh, okay. 18th. Oops. Post October 18th. Even now, you already have such incredible knowledge that I really believe that you're going to share with anyone else who runs as well, the good and the bad. And I think the more that we share the bad, I mean, hopefully women and anyone who's interested is more prepared mentally for those, those things that you've encountered. And then that will just keep the momentum going, and we will continue to see more women elected.
Absolutely. And I think, I'm going to share one sort of funny story that really clicked for me as to why I need to just go for this. But I was watching television with my husband a number of months ago, and I think we were getting some kind of American channel because a advertisement came on for the American military. And you know how those are. They're like recruitment, and they're very rah and rock and roll, and they make it look, it's propaganda. But my husband was watching it, and he was like really into it. And after it ended, he turned to me and he said, I don't know what it would take. Like, I don't know what the requirements are. But if I wanted to be on SEAL Team 6, I'm pretty sure I could have done it. And I paused and just thought about this for a second, because for those who don't know, like SEAL Team 6 is like the most elite force of the U.S. military. They captured Osama bin Laden. Yes. There's and here's my husband, who, bless him, I love him to bits, doesn't know anything about the qualifications that you would need, doesn't have any perspective of what the journey would be to become a member of SEAL Team 6, but he has 100% confidence that if he had wanted it, he could have it. Mm-hmm. And for me, I was sitting there on the couch thinking about, I have so much experience from being an Olympian. I know what it's like to, work very hard for something in relative obscurity for many, many years, for one moment chance of excellence, and very limited resources chasing excellence. I have a master's degree in public policy, so specifically focused on municipal issues. And, I have all this experience in both the public and private sector and international commissions and all these things. And I'm doubting whether I am the right person
But he could be a SEAL.
But he could be a SEAL. And yes. So I tell that story, not to poke too much fun at my husband, but more to just illustrate, I think, the different perspectives that men and women have. And so I often start to tell myself this story like, oh yeah, it's harder. There's these invisible barriers. And then I have to stop myself, because I do think that we have to, in some ways, really push women to run and to do this, because there are so many men who, are already on SEAL Team 6. And so,
or believe that they have the ability to be on SEAL Team 6 without any of the qualifications. No disrespect to your husband. I haven't met him in person, so I don't know if he has that potential or not, but that is it's a confidence gap. There are I need to rephrase this. We women and girls need to have the confidence that so many boys and men have entering into politics, who feel they are qualified by inherently just being themselves, with I was talking to my husband about this last night, because the next guest on Elected is going to be Erica Barudis, who's running for the Canadian Senate. And I said, so many people responded back to her by saying, oh, you're too young. Well, okay, but no one told Andrew Scheer he was too unqualified, because he wasn't even a qualified insurance salesperson. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, for sure. And you're getting into some of these archetypes that I think exist in our society. So young man on the rise.
Yes,
so you're
exactly.
Not married, you're not married. You don't maybe have a lot of experience, but
potential unlimited.
Exactly. And I don't think there's an equivalent of young woman on the rise. I think people just tend to be more skeptical of it and ask what your experience is. And, no one's going to take you seriously. I've had people, question, oh, well, if you're going to run for city council, like, do you think people are really going to listen to you? And yes, I do think people are going to listen to me. And not only that, I think one of the things some mistakes we make in politics all the time is assume that the person who can show up on budget day and make an impassioned speech is the good politician. And in my view, it's the politician that can go door to door to every other politician in the weeks before and talk to them about how they're voting, why, and what can we do to all agree. Like that, to me, whipping the votes and getting the actual work done is what we need to see more of. Less impassioned speeches, less grandstanding. And so, I think I can do this job really well.
I love it. I love that you think that you can do this job really well, because I think you can do this job really well. And I'm really hoping that that you are elected, because your voice is one that I think our city desperately needs in terms of being representative of our population, a more accurate representation of our population in Calgary. And I think we're both like committed to building the city and the province that we want. I think we both think we know that Albertans deserve. And so I'm really excited for you in these next few months.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. So thank you so much for being on Elected. And I think it would be a missed opportunity. If anyone is interested in your campaign or your story or reaching out to you, what are your social media handles and what's your website?
Sure. So my website is jasmine4ward3.ca. So you can check out my platform. You can volunteer there. You can donate there. You can request a lawn sign if you live in Ward 3. So that's a great place to start. And then I can also be found on Facebook. Just Jasmine4Ward3 is my Facebook page. And I'm on Instagram and Twitter with just my name, Jasmine Mian.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening. This was another episode of Elected, a podcast for women in and around politics. And until next time.